OCs is shorthand for original characters, but a subcategory for that are fan OCs, characters people made that exist in an already existing universe, mostly for games and shows, books, stuff like that. Kind of like making an avatar in a video game, except just for any piece of media. They might not necessarily take the role of a main or existing character, but they have a bunch of different ways that they could exist in a universe. Some fan OCs have their storylines that happen separate, but alongside the plot of the actual piece of media they're from, and some people only make 1 or 2 fan OCs per media that they wish to make one for, and some may make a bunch of whatever they're fixated on at the moment. I can be of both, but for today's video, I'm more on the latter side of things. I am currently in the process of rewriting a bunch of my fan OCs into new stories, putting them into OC retirement until I can find a new home for them. I like recycling my characters after all, but there are some fan characters of mine from a particular podcast whose original stories are not quite finished yet for reasons. Back in 2020, I, like a lot of people, got into a horror podcast called The Magnus Archives, a show following Jonathan Sims as he dives into the mysteries of the statements he records. In The Magnus Archives, we find out all about the monsters and horrors that originate from these entities called the Fears. There's 14 entities that feed on people's specific spheres, such as heights, bugs, fire, pain, and many, many more. There are technically 15, but if you hate spoilers, then I recommend that you listen to the Magnus Archives before continuing this video, because we are going to get into all of the spoilers here today, baby. And in case you haven't figured it out yet, this video is going to be me talking about my Magnus Archives OCs. I want to make more videos that are art and character focused, and since I have a bunch of different projects and such planned, I thought it would be a fun practice for those. Considering I'm still doing Magnus Archives stuff with half of these characters, a little bit more on that at the end of the video. I want to show you guys all the things I make, so why not make videos about it? In the period of OC rambling, the art will be me drawing said character I will be talking about at the moment, starting with this first one who I've been playing on in the background for a little bit. We'll be seeing all these final pieces at the end, but I made around 12 drawings for 16 characters! I didn't realize how many Magnus Archives OCs I had until then. So please stick around, my hand and back skin used the validation. So let's start with my very first Magnus Archives OC. Okay. Well, technically they're not the first, but rather the first of 2. I had split my original idea up for this character into like 2 separate characters. So I originally started the idea of 1 character, ended up cutting it in half and making 2 characters from this original concept. So let's talk about like who the very first one of these 2 characters are. Now for this like original character, I originally wanted my first Magnus Archives OC to be a vast avatar. The vast is about the fear of falling and heights and being small in the big expanse of nothing. Basically the negative side of nihilism. Why should I care when everything is so small and insignificant in the face of everything? You know, that kind of mindset. It's my favorite of the entities if you couldn't tell, so it was the one I had to draw like my first avatar as because I wanted a vast OC. But my original concept was so boring of a character. Someone who was a book thief took off with a lightner, jumped off a cliff to escape their pursuers, and before you ask, yes, that's basically a copy of Mike Crew's backstory, which is the exact reason why I ended up not going with this character. Their story wasn't one-to-one with his, but there was no supernatural monsters and no research into the fears. I think this guy originally had a huge interest in getting lighteners, made a mistake, and the Vast took pity on them, but it was a kind of lame idea. And I didn't want to completely ditch everything about this character because there was some aspects of it I still liked, and I only had this like 1 doodle of them, so I didn't want to like throw out the design because I thought the design was very cute. Well, after some brainstorming for this character for some time, I was ready to drop it all together until I had the thought, why not change what kind of avatar they are? And so here we are now introducing my horrible, horrible child. This is Denver Lowe, an avatar of the Spiral and the world's most loser magician. Now that I made that switch, the story came to me much easier, and with a week, I had a full story for Denver planned out. Denver Lowe was a lonely child growing up in Chicago with a single mother. At school, they were picked on by kids, due to both being quiet and withdrawn, but also because of their albinism. By themselves, however, Denver was a star, making up imaginary friends to play games and throw performances for, all to keep themselves busy and get company and stay entertained as their mother worked hard to support the 2 of them. Then, one day, the harsh realization of how alone they really are hit, and how these games were just lies to hide how unwanted they really feel. And that was the perfect moment for the lonely to try and take them. Denver, terrified by the mysterious fog rolling in, tries to go look for their mom at where she works, but none of the streets are familiar anymore, and the fog just keeps getting thicker and closer. At some point, Denver, in despair, hides under a discarded box, and stays there crying until a passing adult finds them. Denver is taken to the police, and it's discovered that what to them felt like hours was actually weeks. They've been missing for weeks. So Denver returns to school, surprised to find that they've suddenly become popular. The police assumed it was a kidnapping, and so their classmates wanted to know all of the details, and Denver, unable to vocalize what really happened, let everyone just believe it. And Denver glowed in this attention with what the lies that they told gave them, finding something that filled that void inside of them and craved more of it, spinning lies that made people look to them more, getting people's affection in their eyes, at least that's what they believed it was. And Denver later on grew to become a magician, taking the stage and leaving that horrible lonely business behind them. Until years later, when researching for more tricks, Denver came across a lightener, one of the lonely that, when read, makes time seem like it's flying by, making the reader miss chunks of time as the world progresses without them. When Denver finished the passage and realized that months have gone by, they stole the book. After all, made for a really good disappearing act. That's when Denver started to look into the fears and when they discovered the spiral. This was a fear that they could dedicate themselves to, and dedicate they did. It became a part of their act, sending their victims to a liminal space hell in the guise of a disappearing act, and their victims gradually getting more lost and confused long after the show is ended, only to eventually get lost and disappear forever. But before this unfortunate part of their act happens, the Denver will simply just disappear themselves away from the stage before their victims can question what had happened, reappearing an hour or so later when the stage finally clears out. I loved writing this character, mainly because Denver's both an asshole and a massive coward, and it's fun to explore that side of their character. I love describing them as very bullyable. You can just pick them up and shove them in a locker, and I mean that literally. Denver is very short compared to, like, most of my other Avatar OCs. The Distortion also thinks that they're bullyable since they pissed Denver, never showed up for the Spirals ritual, and holds that over their head to make them do stuff for them. Denver just likes to do their things and find stability in that, and not looking more for that other than comfort in the thing that they've given themselves. They are a little baby. I'm not saying that is a little guy thing. They fucking suck. And if they ever needed to leave in a pinch, well, all they need to do is just open up a book. And here's Denver, so now on to the next one. If I said Denver is very bullyable, then this next character is the opposite, and probably would be the bully. This is my baby girl, Cecilia Leonard, and no, I did not name her after Celia. I made her before the episode where we find out Lynn changed her name to Celia came out. I wouldn't have named Cecilia her name if I knew that beforehand, mostly because of the confusion it could cause when talking about her in context with the Magnus archives. But because I'm rewriting her for original thing, it shouldn't be much of an issue once that's like the thing I focus on her with. But also my friends thought it'd be really funny if I had an OC named Chicago who grew up in Denver, and Cecilia was the name that came to me from that. I'm sorry, Chicago Leonard is not a thing, but I already have a whole set of sibling OCs whose names are all puns. I cannot be doing joke names with all of my characters. But regardless, she's my favorite, and I made what I didn't use from that OG Vast Avatar concept, which ended up not being much left over. Mostly the outfit and the fact that she is also a Vast Avatar. Everything else, however, is very different, including her backstory. Cecilia, in a way, is a lot like Agnes Montague in terms of just being as closely born as an Avatar as someone can possibly be. But the circumstances of her being born as a Vast Avatar are completely different than Agnes's situation was. Mostly because it was unintentional. Her parents were on a cruise, weeks and weeks before she was to be expected. Another unimportant Vast Avatar was on the ship and sabotaged it, causing it to sink. Whether or not it was an attempt to start a ritual or experiment for a future one, I never really decided on that, but the ship sank quite a distance down and drowned a lot of people, trapping others in air pockets inside, like Cecilia's parents, away from the surface in the vast expanse of nothing. Cecilia was born during this, and by the time the rescue managed to get to her, time had passed and Cecilia remained the only survivor on the ship. She was given to her grandparents in Denver, Colorado to be raised, and was early on a very odd child. Kids get into mysterious accidents around her, oftentimes falling off of trees or downstairs, and maybe suddenly being pulled underwater for a bit. Although these incidents can never be proven to be done by Cecilia, her family had their suspicions, and when she was in her late teens, her grandparents sent her to a wilderness therapy camp with other troubled kids. Sometime during this, Cecilia made all the employees disappear, leaving the rest of the kids alone in the wilderness. Cecilia left shortly after this and decided to go off on her own to do her own thing, no concern with finding any information about her abilities, just wanting to get some kicks in. She eventually made it onto the tundra and joined Peter Lucas's crew for a time. He knew what she was, but he didn't know what the Vast wanted with the Lonely, as he kind of assumed she was an agent sent on there for reasons he wasn't really understanding. So he ignored her until she wouldn't stop annoying him, and that became the point where he realized that she really had no idea what she was. So he laid out all the information about the fears to her, provided she leaves him alone and gets off the tundra once they reach port. She left when they made it to London, and later was acquainted with George Oakley, who's a buried avatar that belongs to my friend Leon. She works as his lawyer, although this woman has never done a lawyering thing in her life, and mostly just kicks people George wants her to have kicked off of buildings. George and Cecilia are best friends, and I love them so much. They are such a best friends, daddy-daughter duo. It's great. Even though I don't draw a lot of Magnus Archive stuff anymore, outside of my comic, I still adore these two and their relationship. Now, I said earlier that Cecilia would be the bully between her and Denver, but her bullying is more of fun teasing, kind of not school or workplace bullying. She likes to make jabs at people, and to be frank, most people find her more annoying than genuinely hurtful, even if some of the stuff she says is really, really mean. She doesn't care though. Cecilia is very laid back and likes to go with the flow of things. Just a very good, chill girl. She's so much fun, even if she can be so mean sometimes. I do a lot more canon Magnus Archive stuff with her than with Denver, mostly with Peter and Elias. Her and George don't like him, but she bullied Elias into using George's bank for storing institute funds. Cecilia sees Peter as a good friend, even though he recoils at the thought. But also Cecilia has a fun little quirk that drives Elias and probably the eye up the wall, and that is she can find out the dirtiest dirt on people so quickly and easily. Elias must know how she can do it so bad and annoys him to no end. No, she didn't do her snooping to find out about the apocalypse too early, but she did find out on her own that Elias was Jonah Magnus. I like to imagine that the first meeting was her walking up to Elias's office and was like, "Hi, Jonah," really loudly, and giving Elias a mini heart attack lest his perfectly good ritual-ready archivist hears that. Cecilia loves being chaotic, mostly for the lulz. A girl's gotta have fun. Now, here's the art, and on to the next one. Now, unlike with Cecilia and Denver, the rest of these characters are not going to really be in the order I made them in, mostly because I don't remember the exact order. However, I will try to have the older ones be presented first, and the newer ones I'll present further back. That being said, let me introduce you to Ramsey Michaels. Ramsey was not a character I came up with or thought out beforehand like the last two, but rather was a result of one of those TikTok make a character based off of those generator kind of games. But this one was specifically a Magnus Archives one, where the finished character was going to be an avatar. We had to put the episodes of the show we were caught up to at that point into a number generator, which I believe at the time made Ramsey Mag 186 had just come out. With each number we landed on, we had to make aspects of the character based off of those episodes. For the kind of avatar they are, I got Mag 32, so Corruption Avatar. Mag 102 for gender, which is a statement given by Elias and Daisy's point of view, so I just made my character gender fluid. I landed on the statement John gives about Breakin', so Ramsey's personality had to be similar to his. I think there were one or two more details about this for the info, but this was the stuff I remember at the top of my head, and Ramsey ended up being the final character I made. Ramsey was a quiet kid growing up in Warwick. Their dad got into beekeeping and kept bees in the backyard. Ramsey grew fascinated with the bees in their hive, but kept a distance, afraid of getting stung, but finding a surprising longing, a desire to belong a part of the hive. Then one day some kids from their neighborhood set the hive on fire and hosed it down, killing the hive. Ramsey was furious with them and found a buzzing anger growing inside of him. One day at school, a classroom got filled with honeycomb. Ramsey, already there, his face replaced by trypophobic holes. A couple of the kids that destroyed her family's hive showed up, and Ramsey killed one of them, her and the body disappearing forever. Ramsey began traveling through towns as a new beekeeper, bringing angry buzzing wherever she goes. Ramsey's story isn't as long or elaborate as Denver or Cecilia's, but I enjoyed coming up with it. I even wrote a more detailed statement about it, which I'll link from their toy house if you guys want to read it. Here is Ramsey, so let's talk about our next girl. Now, of all my Magnus Archives OCs, Valencia Wilbur is probably the one with a story that is most involved with the plot of the Magnus Archives, and I had written it that way because I made her during the height of TikTok cosplay videos, which was something I used to do, mostly during the pandemic. She was specifically supposed to be part of this trend I saw of people who have Magnus Institute OCs who eventually become avatars of whatever entity they become avatars of, but I never really got too much done with it. I didn't get to do much with her, but developing her story was fun, and considering I was working on the floor at a retail job during the height of the pandemic when I had written her, well, you can imagine the amount of emotions that can give you. Valencia was a high school music star, spending her school time writing songs and music with her friends, and then using her summers to play at small dive shows and garage parties. Until one day she was attacked by a mysterious stranger, someone with skin that slid off their wired frame and eyes that seemed to be too uncanny. Valencia lost an eye in this accident, and the experience shook the rest of the bandmates so badly that they ended up disbanding shortly afterwards. Valencia was furious and upset, her one passion gone, and she was left with nothing. Finding herself unable to cope and her parents feeling helpless to cheer her up, Valencia was sent to live with some relatives in London where she could go to school and get a fresh start, maybe even find her passion again. Instead, Valencia dove straight into research, going so far as beginning a degree in parapsychology and finally getting an internship at the Magnus Institute. One late night, Valencia saw the archivist being dragged into Elias's office by a cop, and the other members of the archive shortly following behind them. Curious and against Rosie's protests, Valencia listened in and was caught by Elias. She was moved to help with research with the unknowing, and was in no way very helpful with trying to stop Melanie's murder attempts on Elias. Melanie's got a point after all. After Melanie and Elias' last meeting, Valencia confronts him, but keeping them trapped there and wanting to get out, but Elias points out that she isn't even an employee, unlike the others, and she could leave whenever she wants to. And after the unknowing, Valencia does just that. Except the anger and the rage that's been around her since her accident never really leaves her, and was finally reaching a peak. Even after getting, answers about what exactly had happened. Valencia drops her classes, finds a cheap, crappy place to live farther out from London proper, and works a dead-end retail job, where she has to deal with stupid people day in and day out, all the while the past memories and failures of the last years are constantly playing in and out of her head. She can move past this. She just needs something. But these customers are so annoying, and they're so awful, with their stupid questions, and their complaints, their entitlement. Valencia will be fine. These people just need to shut up and not make their pathetic grievances her own. The incident of Valencia Wilbur had painted a dark stain on the people's lives that day. A poor employee who had finally had a mental breakdown and ended up taking the life of multiple customers and co-workers. The store was in carnage, the Wilburs distraught, and Valencia Wilbur was never seen again, although sometimes a young woman with one eye will appear, and with her, a burning rage towards the people around you. Yeah, in case you couldn't have guessed, Valencia is my slaughter avatar, very much based on working in retail and how sometimes you wish you could legally do physical violence against stupid people. Retail employees deserve a slapping customer's allowance. I will stand by this. If I was a politician, I would make this a law. She also has some Magnus plot-related stuff for Season 5. John and Martin find themselves in a grocery store domain where Valencia asks as a punishing manager. She tries to stop them, angry still over the stuff she thinks ruined her life, and John smites her. Like I said, I never really got to do much with her, but she's one of those characters who I had so much fun writing for, and here she is, all ready to commit more retail crimes. The next character I'm going to be talking about is honestly one of my favorite avatars I made, even if she doesn't have a ton of backstory. This is Ash Bakley, but to her friends and fellow game streamers, she's simply known as PeachyUwu249, the most gamer tag I could come up with a gamer as adorable as her. Ash is a cutesy game streamer getting thousands of views and millions of followers, and she has this fame from being one of the most competitive PvP streamers out there. Think of games like Call of Duty, Overwatch, League of Legends, and the games with the most notoriously toxic gamers screaming insults and slurs at each other. She's in the thick of it, giving back as much vitriol as she's given, and she lives for it, sometimes even starting shit herself. I think she would both stream with a VTuber or with a webcam. I don't really think it matters to her which, but I don't know. I haven't really figured that out. I never went around designing her a VTuber avatar if that was the case, so unfortunately we do not have VTuber Ash Bakley, but we do have actual Ash Bakley, so let me talk a little bit more about her. Ash is a controversial streamer being seen as sometimes too aggressive and mean for no reason in games, tending to target certain players in matches who some eventually find themselves being hunted in their off-game lives, even if those can't be linked back to her officially. But most of Ash's fans don't really mind that she's mean, and in fact sometimes they even encourage her behavior. She's a cute streamer girl who wears cat ears, and there are mean guys on the internet who live in their mom's basements, and she has every right to be a joke to these men, hashtag girl power and all of that. She's one of those Magnus Archives characters who I did have a solid idea for, like a domain she would run. It would be a hunt domain where players are forced into competitive gaming matches, sometimes the violence reaching points where they'll turn on their own team members, controllers thrown to the side as they tear into their useless teammates. And of course, naturally, when the apocalypse is over, nobody calls her out too harshly for it. After all, there are lots of avatars who didn't want to be avatars, and Ash is so sorry. She's my horrible little YouTuber baby, and I love her. Here she is, and now onto my power couple, who you may know if you read my Magnus Archives Affinity Train fan comic. These two are Austin Bard and Dorian Mallard. Both of them are avatars, but they don't follow the same entity. Austin is an avatar of the web, and Dorian is an avatar of the eye. I like these two. They're very cute together and fun to write for, and it'll be nice to talk about their backstories since I couldn't really put too much of that into my comics, so we could get to it here. Austin has been an avatar the longest of the two. They originally were from the west coast of the United States, an indigenous person living in a colonized America in the late 1800s. They were adapted as swindling travelers in the small eventual ghost towns that popped up in the southwest. Not because they like stealing money, they found bandits and robbers distasteful, but rather because they have ambitions of being a story writer and putting their words out there. As Austin is not much of a conversationalist himself, writing has always been a passion of theirs, and because they find it easier to put their thoughts down on paper instead of through their words, they believe that being a writer was their calling. They took that money to travel to Europe, mixing with members of European society, and began to put their work out there. They found that they had a talent for talking people into doing what they want, all by simply using as few words as they can get away with. But some people were not happy with a strange foreign person coming in and taking the spotlight for themselves. Fellow writers and article makers saw Austin to be a formidable rival and an enemy to their careers. One of these jealous individuals invited Austin to his house and proceeded to hit them in the head, dragging them into a cobweb-filled cellar and leaving them there to rot. Austin has claustrophobia and found fear being seemingly buried underground in isolation, but they were not alone, as cellars usually are home to spiders, and this one had plenty. Far too many. When Austin's old rival went to remove what he thought would be a body, the man never left the cellar, and the contents revealed later only showed a single skeletal corpse surrounded in spiderweb. Dorian's story is not as long as Austin's, but it is as similar in their goals. Dorian grew up as a child in the early 1910s in France along with his twin sister, and was really into radio when it entered the public life in the 20s. He listened a lot to the radio well into adulthood, but soon discovered something. He could hear what other people were doing in the vicinity of their radios, regardless of whether they were broadcasting or not. Morbidly curious, he spied on people, going as far as looking into high-profile characters from politicians to celebrities, all without their victims having to actually turn the radio on. Their voices would still come out as clear as day. Dorian himself decided to become a public radio figure himself, and used his show to continue to spread the fear of being watched and secrets known through France. He and Austin met near the height of Dorian's radio career before television entered the home space. The two decided to collaborate with each other, spreading fear in new ways, and ended up catching feelings, eventually getting married when they both could, and living together, starting, of all things, a podcast together. After all, a radio show is just the original type of podcasting, and audio dramas are all the rage with the kids these days. But I wouldn't know anything about that. Dorian and Austin's dynamic is so fun to write for. I wanted them to be such an insufferable couple. Like, so in love that they're sometimes very cringy to be around, but they don't care. They're in love, god damn it, and everyone can deal with it. Here's this pair. Now let's go on to our next trio. You like power couples. What about power thruples? So these three are a fun trio who only really lived in my sketchbook, but I love them. We're gonna have to start with them one by one because again, there's three characters here. I mentioned Dorian has a sister, and he does. This is Divine Mallard, an avatar of the dark. And if you notice I gave her the fanon design aesthetic for eye avatars and Dorian the ones for dark avatars, yeah, that was on purpose because people kept saying Dorian looked like a dark avatar since I made him before Divine. He needed a sister who actually was one. I like some of the fanon aspects people give characters in this fandom, such as like Elias having eye jewelry, but I don't like how some of them are to be like expected when you design certain characters. Like, ignoring like actual canon like stuff, such as like John being really skinny and Martin being big. Like, I'm talking about like people giving John tons of eye jewelry, even though I personally don't think he would lean into the eye aesthetic, particularly because of the everything that happens in the Magnus Archives. I don't know, you do you if you enjoy it. I'm a bit more particular of my interpretations of like what characters look like in podcasts, but it also is like a thing I've noticed with like OCs. Like, eye avatars have big eye aesthetics, and Desolation avatars are all fire themed, and things like that. And I kind of like stepping out of the norm with my designs. So when people were like, oh, is Dorian a dark avatar because of like the closed eye and all the dark purple and I was like, no, he's an eye avatar, but I give him a sister who has the like typical eye aesthetic. But despite the design's appearance, between her and her partners, she's the one who would immediately throw fists if provoked to do so. She was a wild child growing up, getting into trouble with her twin, and her family was annoyed by it, but she didn't care. She and Dorian were close, and she had friends, did well in school, and didn't break the law, so who cares if her behavior wasn't super ladylike. Like Dorian's love for radio, Divine had her own unique interest, the railroad system. She wanted to work on a train and dreamed of the day to move to America to be involved in its large railroad system. Also, you just hear my dog sneeze in the background. But things seemed to follow her in the dark. Things has followed her across the pond even after she thought she had escaped them. One day, the train she worked on moved through a tunnel and promptly disappeared, reappearing weeks later. Passengers on board, traumatized but relatively alive, describe stories of monsters in the dark and a mysterious stewardess with a missing eye. Again with the missing eye theme. That was something I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna have Divine have like a black hole for an eye, and I was like, oh, I already did that with Valencia, but whatever, it's fine. Divine returned to Europe, and she brought with her a new flavor of terror, just to a new kind of people. Her partner stories is not as detailed, but if I were still really in the Magnus archives, I would want to put more work into their stories. Buck Maisley was a worker on building sites working for a company that looked the other way when it came to building safety. Buck had tried to reason with the owners, and he decided to take some revenge in order to get the company sued. That ended up costing his and his co-workers' lives as the building was brought down on all of them, but the company was shut down at least when they couldn't pose the building's collapse as anything but negligence. And Buck still was able to act upon a sort of vigilante role as a buried avatar, until that role became so twisted he stopped being able to distinguish those who are victims and those who needed to pay. Morgan Hill was an artist, loving their craft as a still-life artist, but soon their drawings became stale. The crowd's bored, and their paintings would not sell or show anymore. Morgan wanted to stand out and decided what they needed to do was to update their style, in more abstract and interesting ways. The problem was they had difficulty imagining what that looked like. They eventually ordered a custom life-size mannequin, one that could bend in ways unnatural to a human body or stretch longer than a body should. What came out of using these references were appealing yet uncanny paintings that blew up among the public, but Morgan was not satisfied with their work despite the public's approval. Their paintings became more abstract, more uncanny, more gruesome, until finally one day they and the doll disappeared, and the works of Morgan Hill became those of a niche oddity horror artists took inspiration from. I have a soft spot for avatars of different entities falling in love with each other and trying to wrap their own fear bullshit with their partners. Dorian and Austin's a little less complicated, considering the whole spoiler-filled thing the web has going on. I don't think Austin would want to keep that a secret at some point during their relationship, mostly for the fear of seeing their partner possibly accidentally killing himself for a goal Austin knows is unattainable, and would go against their instinct to straight up tell Dorian the truth about the rituals. Dorian's love for their spouse would stop him from attempting to do a ritual, but I don't think it would be a difficult one for him to make. Not if he knows that the web is working on making a successful Watcher's crown. He could go buy out of it later even if he wasn't the one to make the ritual happen itself. And if the web's plan fails, hey, at least he'll be able to reap the benefits of being a follower of an entity with a actual successful ritual. So it's a little bit of a win for him. Divine, Morgan, and Buck, however, don't really have that problem, mostly because they're pretty satisfied with the terror they bring together and find the collaboration about as fulfilling as if they went completely solo on their own fear exploits to bring about a successful fear ritual. Buck could bring on the fear of faulty construction, of being buried under tons of concrete and metal caused by someone's lack of care into the things they built through the train system, and Europe has a really big train system. Divine could bring on the fear of the dark and the lack of light as the end of the tunnel and the fear of going forth through it but not doing it anyway, hoping against all hope that nothing will come for them as an entrance will eventually at some point become too far to escape through. And Morgan could bring on the fear of the uncanny and unnatural, a stranger who is supposed to help but hurts instead, supposed to lend a service but brings harm with them. They find their own happiness putting on their own mark on the train they built themselves, and I'm happy for them for it, all things considered. With that in mind, let's go on to our next avatar, one that I get a lot of people debating if she really would be an avatar of this sphere, but we're going to get to my reasoning and my little rant about that after I tell you guys all about Desdemona Stone. Desdemona is from Alberta in Canada with her sister and indecisive parents who are never satisfied with where they lived. Because of that, Desdemona had trouble feeling attached to things, knowing that at some point it all was going to be taken away from her. Friendships became pointless, and because of that, Desdemona was practically constantly alone. She wasn't sure if she even wanted friends, and found a sick satisfaction in suffering out a budding friendship over letting it grow. She was cold, distant, and satisfied with it all, not because she enjoyed the distance, but rather because the cycle of tearing down something half-built was a comfort, as an expected part of her life that she knew would always be constant. That is, until she met one of her coworkers at a marketing position she got shortly after leaving college. The two of them eventually got together, and Desdemona found herself with a relationship she didn't want to burn. All was too good to last, and after a heated argument at work, not only did Desdemona break up with her partner, but they both found themselves fired, and Desdemona was left to pick up the crumbling pieces of her life again. Nothing but ash, left to destroy. Her sister, on the other hand, was doing great, and after finding out what happened, she asked Desdemona if she would like to join her friends for a pseudo-camping ski trip they were going on. Desdemona agreed, and she surprisingly found a great sense of comfort in the cold. The cold, chilling bite, grounding, and the freezing feeling in her hands more real than anything in her life, as she had torn down leading into that moment. A snowstorm came into the area, and among the comforting freezing cold, Desdemona was surrounded by her siblings' argumentative friends who were not happy with how the trip was going. All but Desdemona wanted to leave. They became angry, searching for a way out, but the piling snow never showed them the route home. A weekend trip became multiple weeks, and when the snow thawed some and a rescue party could be sent out, all that was left was empty tents and the body of one of the party members, the rest missing and never found. The case eventually became closed, the missing people presumed to be eaten by animals, but other people didn't think so. Some travelers who went into these woods told stories of a cold figure following them, bringing frost and pain with them wherever they go. And if you couldn't guess that Desdemona is a desolation avatar, well then now you know. I've had people tell me she would have been a lonely avatar because of the cold thing, but here's the kicker, that idea is also mostly false. Canonically, in fact, because coldness is not one of the main associations with the lonely. The lonely, yes, sometimes has an association with the cold. There are a handful of statements that do include a chill, but only a couple. But do you know which entity almost always has some kind of association with the cold? The dark. Look back at all the dark statements. A majority of them talk about something cold and or wet at some point. I can only think of maybe one or two that don't. The lonely, on the other hand, only maybe a few times there's a statement that mentions the spooky stuff being associated with chill. Plus, are we forgetting the fact that the dark's ritual took place in Nialasund? I mean, that is the most one of the most biggest arguments things I could think of for that. However, that does not mean I'm arguing that Desdemona should have been a dark avatar when her being cold is not the desolation part of her whole thing. Fire has a huge association for the desolation, yes, but you also have to remember the desolation is not just about fire, but also pain and destruction and losing everything. Specifically, everything you love being completely obliterated. Fire can do that easy enough, but I think outside the box a little bit, because the fears are not as rigid as the boxes we put them in. Frost destruction can be horrible, and yeah, it's very destructive, and also, have you ever had a limb get frozen and then thawed out? It really hurts. One time my mom slammed the car door on my frozen hand on accident, and when that thawed, that hurt so bad. One of the worst pains in my life. If fire can be a destructive force, why can't a snowstorm or a snow avalanche be as well? Now if you guys really want a lonely avatar, let me talk about my next guy, Louis Giles. He, like some of these other characters, don't have too much information, but he's a character whose concept I enjoy. Louis found his calling as a lonely avatar in his early 20s, taking a backpacking trip around Eurasia, a trip that no one but him will ever know the story of. When he came back, he became a therapist, but his clients were of the unusual kind. Recently made monsters, those who didn't understand what happened to them and are having trouble coping. Yes, Louis is an avatar's therapist, one who craves the fear of isolation for those who go through big, unexplainable events in their lives, what better praise there than those who already have become agents of fear? I personally think it's funny if avatars have avatars that go after them. Louis is probably the least harmful of my avatars, and his interactions rarely result in death. If anything, his goal is to have other avatars actually actualize themselves in their role. It's just not their fault if they fall into the fear of it, or if they let that fear consume them. He gets a little benefit out of that. But don't worry, he won't stick you into a fog-filled hellscape. Just don't give him a reason to. On the other hand, we have Heaven Isley, our avatar of the flesh. Heaven is a cult leader who takes the phrase, "your body is a temple," quite literally. I guess you could describe him as a fitness cult leader, but not in the anti-vax kind of way. Your body is special, will be the only home you'll ever really know, so why not take care of it and really make it into a home to be proud of? I'm gonna let you guys imagine what that means, but let me ask you guys, how fond of you are of Me House Horror? I love Me House Horror. One of my favorite webcomics is literally about that, but Yuri flavored. Go read Masonry of the Body, it's a very good webcomic. Heaven is a manipulative and conniving good talker who takes the things most people want and uses them to work against his opponents. I mean, the guy has a full-fledged cult out in the middle of American nowhere, and the guy has not had a collapse of belief before the world actually ended. He would have had to have the skills to pull that off, considering most Avatar cults we know of in the Magnus archives were done for or fractured by the time the podcast reached the apocalypse. Good for him, I guess. Have fun with your homes made of people, meet Heaven. And if you guys want someone who's even worse than Heaven, here is by far my worstest guy, the most stinkiest man of all these characters. This is Midas von Boulevard, Avatar of the Extinction. Think of every young millionaire CEO type of guy. That is Midas, but with fear powers. Midas was the son of a wealthy billionaire who died when he reached adulthood, later his mother following suit. Now with millions to his name, Midas could lead the kind of lifestyle most can only dream of, filled with lavish trips and major shopping sprees. But like every billionaire, he wanted more ways to ruin people's lives. I fucking hate billionaires. Midas began investing heavily in oil, watching the profits soar. Environmentalist groups began calling him out for his action in climate change. Unbothered and enjoying the change of pace and things, Midas decided to get rid of them by simply throwing money at the problem, donating some, but not as much as he does to his, investments. Mostly to environmental groups, like beach cleanups, oil spills, wildfires, and things of the like. He started growing drawn to these, eyeing the trash-covered beaches too long, watching the roaring infernos on the screen, all the while some deep feeling in his being just gripped him with a terror he has never felt before. Maybe it was the small growing knowledge of the direction his actions were leading him to. Maybe he's grown a conscience? Or maybe he just wants to see what kind of catastrophe this all will lead to. He routinely visited some places that were the hallmarks of his donations, going so far as to visiting an actual oil rig owned by one of the people he invested to, only to be met with a tragic end by exploding with the rig itself. Nobody said it was an accident, and one can discover a lot about themselves engulfed in a burning slick tar. Midas returned home with a new vigorous need to put more money into conservation, a welcome and surprising change to his critics, but these new environmental efforts were strangely off. Weird mutated animals showing up on hiking trail cleanups, still living birds and possibly filled with plastic waste, oil that seems to be coming from the sea life itself, unable to breathe in clean waters anymore, and aggressive toxins that just seem too alive. They have the backing of a billionaire, but all it seems to have brought is a chance to torture those striving for a cleaner future. Midas is such a fun character for me to write for simply because he just sucks. That's it. I don't need to give him a justification for his actions, not like Cecilia, who didn't know anything else, or Denver, whose actions were led by their own fear. Midas is just a crappy person who finds joy in the fear he gives his victims, as most avatars do, and he's just very unpleasant to be around. He's super detached from most people, and even other avatars don't really like him that much. Sorry Midas, being a billionaire is on the grounds for making people hate you. Fear power is not required. He also has the most bizarre fashion sense of all my characters. He has no set design, just constantly changing his hair and his outfits. The most gaudy plastic-filled jewelry, the better. Does his outfits look good most of the time? No, but he doesn't care because he's loud and he stands out. And you'll never forget someone like him. I also gave him a whole thing about really hating birds. I don't know why. I just thought it was funny. I think most art I have of him publicly is with him with a bird. Now that was my last Avatar OC, and you're probably going, hey Daryl, you said there were 15 fears, but you only talked about 14 characters. What about the end? Well, that's because I never made one. I had an idea for a while ago, an avatar at the end who gives their victim an impractical item to hold on to as like a lucky charm to keep them from dying in random freak accidents that would just start happening around them, but continue in intensity as time goes on. A glove that's hard to hold, or a large knife that's too hard to conceal. Putting these objects down for a long period of time makes the accidents worse and eventually sometimes fatal, but having the item on hand causes you to just barely escape anything that'll leave you more than a scratch. Sometimes this ends with the accident slowing down, but the feeling of always needing that lucky item never leaves the victim. Or their story ends in an eventual death, where even your lucky keepsake can't save you. A neat concept, but one I never actualized, but now you know what I would have thought it for an end avatar. I just didn't have the motivation to work much outside of a concept for this character, and by the time I thought of it, I wasn't drawing as much Magnus Archive stuff to justify making a character out of it. However, just because I told you guys all about my Avatar OCs does not mean I told you guys about all of my TMA OCs, because I have two more I need to talk about who are from the Magnus Archives universe, but not avatars or Magnus Institute employees. We'll start with Noelle. Noelle Simmons is actually an NPC from a game I GM'd some years ago. My friend Alex Kingsley, who may have heard me talk about in my Stench of Adventure video, had made a fan-made Magnus Archives tabletop RPG called Dance the World Anew. This was before Rusty Quill made the Kickstarter for the actual Magnus Archives tabletop RPG game, before you guys ask, so yeah. Alex wanted some beta testers, and I asked to be one, grabbing a group of my friends and fellow Magnus Archives fans to play the game. The object of the game was for there to be two sides, the Archives and the Avatars. The Archives had to thwart the end of the world, while the Avatars had to gain objects of power in order to bring their fears to our reality. Hence, dance the world anew. It was a play on how in the Magnus Archives Elias was getting John-marked by all the fears in order to bring them into our world, but with objects instead. In one session, both sides were gathering information on the next object they needed to collect, which was a black paint of the dark that was just Vantablack before Vantablack was the thing, because this game was set in 1994 for reasons. During the Avatar's search for their next object, they came across a victim of Maxwell Rayner, Noel. Noel is a painter, and he was hired by Rayner to paint one of his churches, and in the process almost got sucked into the darkness of the painted walls. My group got attached to Noel. George, the berry avatar that I mentioned before, who Leon decided to play as for a character in this game because he also was a player, offered to pay for his therapy, leaving the guy confused and a bit flustered when the group left. We didn't do much with him after that. The game ended shortly afterwards, but he was a fun NPC, and I like him, so he stuck around. Now, I know I spent this whole video lore dumping for so long, and you guys are probably tired, but I have to end this video with the best for last. My baby girl, my sweet, stupid child. Guys, I have a question for you. Have you ever wanted Florida Man to be a character in the Magnus Archives? Well, now you can! This is Stacy Noren. Stacy is a born and bred Florida native, enjoying her time in the isolated slums of Florida, working as a handy woman in a nearby town. She doesn't need anything big and fancy in life, just her chair on the porch, the breeze from the water around her, and maybe an occasional sweet treat from the cafe in town. Life is perfect for this girlie in that way. But life also just won't leave her alone. Strange animals, weird strangers, and other things of the like tend to keep being drawn to Stacy, and she just can't seem to catch a break from it. Why are the horrors after her? Why doesn't she just move away if Florida is filled with fear monsters? Because Stacy is incredibly oblivious to all of the horror around her. You know that plumber from the one episode of Season 3 of the Magnus Archives? The one where he, went to, this house Nicola was at, and Nicola spent the whole time talking about how she was gonna skin him, and he was just, half listening, being like, yeah, okay, nice, that's so nice, thanks for telling me about your hobbies, and she had to call him back just so she could scare him. Imagine that, but worse. Agents of the Dark coming to her door to demand a cooperation, well, they were just stupid solicitors trying to sell her garbage. Giant monsters that seem to hunger for human flesh. Florida wildlife is just weird like that. And we're always discovering new animals. Unexplained mutant mold on the roof? Well, all Stacy needs is a crowbar, gallons of bleach, and a day working under the sun before she burns the deceased rot in the yard. Mold's normal in the wetlands after all, right? Stacy would be one of those characters in the Usher Foundation who would have a whole filing cabinet on her, asking her for experiences and her yapping away on the white-haired dog she saw with too many mouths. I think they would expect her to be an avatar, but no, she's just a normal woman who also happens to be from Florida. In fact, in the change, I think her domain would be the opposite of a typical domain, where she is unknowingly an avatar of that domain, but her victims are other avatars and beings that didn't make the cut for their own domain, and they spend their whole time trying to get fear from her. Their fear at never escaping at a nightmare feeling her own oblivious nature. She is one of those characters I have so much fun with, and the definition of how you can make up a guy and put them anywhere. Fuck it being canon compliant. I have a woman who rejects fear because she may be practically smart, but socially she's just as aware as a doorknob. And that goes about all of it from all my TMA characters. I have plans to rewrite most if not all of them for original projects I'm working on, but I wanted to share their original stories from when they were Magnus Archives characters before they got rewritten. I'm still fond of them, and they're the foundation of who these characters will eventually become. I already posted at least one animation with Denver related to their new story, where they're a teacher at a pseudo-magic school / refugee camp, and their boyfriend becomes a hive mind who wants to fix the gods with mushrooms. That's a whole thing. I also want to make a video about that. Cecilia is also being moved to this project as well. She doesn't have as much stuff as Denver does yet, but what I'm cooking up is going to be so fun. And they're not the only ones. I recently had ideas for how I can move both Noelle and Valencia into In Harmony, and now that I do, you will see more of them in that story eventually. I also said earlier that I'm not done with some of these Magnus Archives character stories yet, and that is because of my fam comic Not Quite Somewhere Else. If you love both the Magnus Archives and Infinity Train, you should go check it out. It's free to read on Tapas, link in the description down below. Not Quite Somewhere Else has been on hiatus due to both school and me playing catch up on other work that's been paused because of school, but part of me making this video now is because I could finally put it back into my, work schedule, and this comic is starting its second to last arc, which is exciting for me. I'm very excited for that. And for anyone who enjoyed learning about my Magnus Archives OCs, you might want to catch up on the comic and see what that's about, because it looks like maybe there might be a couple characters who are already in the comic and maybe more showing up. I don't know, you're gonna have to read the comic to find out! But if you do want to check out these original stories I keep talking about, hey guys, I have another webcomic. In Harmony is my queer horror webcomic. We just finished chapter 3 with a lesson on why you should not touch the wildlife. Don't read too much into it, unless you decide to read the comic itself on inharmony.the-comic.org. Chapter 4 will start in September, but Patreons in the Myonic level get pages 2 weeks early. So if you want to see chapter 4 before everyone else, consider becoming a patron. And if you love horror and the Magnus Archives, we also do a monster blog for every monster introduced in the comic. Wow! My final announcement is that I am on VGen. You can commission me for art or give me a follow. Help me get one step closer to becoming verified. Me earning money through Patreon and VGen means I can spend more time on making videos like this just for you. Thank you for watching, and have a good one. Bye!